للسلم فاجنح لها وتوكل على الله. If those who are fighting you incline towards peace, you incline towards peace. And then put your trust in Allah. You incline towards peace. And then put your trust in Allah. And it says, فَإِنْ انْتَهَوْا فَلَا عُدْوَانَ إِلَّا عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. If they cease fighting you, then you cease. And there's no further transgression except against those who oppress. This is our religion. The origin is peace. And the anomaly is war. As Sheikh Hamza mentioned yesterday, لا تتمنوا لقاء العدو. Don't anticipate meeting the enemy. فَسَلَ اللَّهِ الْعَافِيَةِ. Ask Allah for health, safety, and security. Pray for safety and security, because war is hell. War is hell. And now that hell disproportionately descends on the Muslims, because we're no longer talking about spears where everyone can fashion a spear. The Muslim can make a spear just as well as the non-Muslim. We're no longer talking about swords, so the Muslims can make a sword just as well as the non-Muslims. So there's parity. Now we're talking about disproportionate force. And that disproportionate force cannot be marshaled by the Muslims. It can be marshaled against the Muslims. And it's becoming increasingly disproportionate. We're talking about, they're working on weapons where you can push a button and scramble the brains of an entire population. And we have no viable defense. Just as we have no viable defense against air bombardment. Why was Iraq bombed into the Middle Ages? They had a sophisticated modern state financed by oil money. Iraq was an OPEC oil exporting country, and they built a modern infrastructure. But they were powerless to stop avoid the destruction of that modern infrastructure. Because all of the weapons at their command, they were provided by the people fighting them. Iraq didn't build the Mirages. They got them from France. They said they had chemical, biological capability, nuclear, on the verge of developing a nuclear bomb. Where did they get all that technology from? They got it from Britain. They got it from American companies. That's where it came from. And the people who provided it made sure there was no effective deterrent against it being turned on them. And so more bombs than were dropped in the Second World War, in every theater of war, were dropped on the Iraqis. And the sewage treatment plants were destroyed. So the people had to drink sewage. Knowing this would lead to disease, would lead to the deaths of those 500,000 children that Madeleine Albright admitted to 4 years ago on 60 Minutes as an acceptable consequence of the policy this country's pursuing there. And the number is far higher. That's what was admitted to, brothers and sisters. Literally nuclear war. The Iraqis experienced the fallout, no pun intended, of nuclear war. Why, on the one hand, there was a weapon used against their troops that has the force of a small nuclear device, a fuel-air explosive device. And on the other hand, 100 tons of depleted uranium was put on the tips of projectiles to facilitate piercing armor, and then as it sliced through the armor like butter, like a knife slicing through butter, it vaporized. And then that vapor traveled throughout the air and settled in the dust, and then the dust was blown. Now we see the babies born without eyes, without internal organs, with nubs on their arms, and increasingly so. And the same thing in Afghanistan. There's been a drought there. And the same weapons has been used. And now that atomic radiation in the dust is blowing all over the place. And this, even in this country, we're experiencing the consequence of that. Gulf War syndrome. The Veterans Association is suing the Department of Defense because they're experiencing the fallout of this. Hoof and mouth disease is rampant in Iraq. Why? Because the factory they had eradicated. The factory that makes the vaccine for the animals. It wasn't destroyed in the war. It was destroyed by the United Nations with the consent and encouragement of this country in 1994. Why? Because the vaccine could be used to make nerve gas. So now hoof-mouth disease is ravaging the livestock of Iraq. Old world screwworm is rampant in Iraq. Old world screwworm attacks human beings. It starts on the mucous membranes of the human body. So that includes the mouth and the anal orifice. It attacks the sheep, but as it proliferates, it spreads to human population. All of this is confronting the Iraqi people, and we know what's confronting the Afghani people. So people who are saying, fight, 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 as Muslims, and who haven't taken one measure to develop any effective deterrence against these terrible weapons of mass destruction, of genocidal import and implication against the Muslims, are engaging in the epitome of irresponsibility and haven't understood Islam at its most basic and fundamental level. We have to address this. So Ismail alayhi salam said, "Satajiduni inshallah min as-sabirin." And this patience is what led to the relieving or the lifting of the trial that his father had been exposed to. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا, when both of them had submitted their wills to Allah, Ibrahim showed his willingness to implement this law order to sacrifice his beloved son. And Ismail, so this is a story of two people. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا, when the two of them had submitted to Allah, and Ismail said, I'm patient. Whatever you have to do, I'm ready for it. Father, فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ, and Ibrahim had thrown him on the ground and he was preparing to sacrifice him. What was he told at this point? وَنَدَيْنَاهُمْ أَيَّا Ibrahim, and we called out, O Ibrahim, قَدْ صَدَّقْتَ رُؤْيَا, you fulfilled the vision. You've shown your truthfulness in implementing this order you've received in your vision. And then Allah Ta'ala says, إِنَّا كَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ, thus do we save those who are true and good and sincere in their worship. إِنَّا كَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So what was the source of their salvation? فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا, when they had submitted themselves to what Allah had exposed them to of this trial. Then, إِنَّا كَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ, thus do we save those who are exceedingly good. إِنَّ هَذَا Allah, إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ الْبَلَاءُ الْمُبِينَ, verily this was nothing but a clear trial. This was a trial. So this life, brothers and sisters, we're going to be tried in this life. We're going to be tried to see how we respond to these trials. And we have to respond with patience, perseverance, and wisdom. We have to respond with wisdom. And by doing so, the trial is lifted. That's the nature of this life. That's the nature of this life. And our response to these trials determines how we are going to live in the real life, the life to come. This is only a test. This is only a test. And then we get the rewards for passing the test after the test. This whole life is a test. تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ الْمُلْكِ وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Blessed is the one who has in his hand the dominion of all things, and he over all things has power. الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. The one who has created death and life and everything between these two ends to test you and try you to see which of you is best indeed. Which of you is best indeed? Which of you are going to continue to articulate the lofty principles of Islam? Or will we sell out to the corrupt and corruptible influences of this world. We return and look for a way out in the ways of men who are like those described. Those who are like cattle, those who don't use the faculties Allah has blessed us with to try to understand the wisdom and the underlying realities that govern this existence, that govern this world. We look for their solutions. Their solutions are the solutions of people who are turned away from God. Their political solutions are predicated on power politics, or predicated on realpolitik. Machiavelli, what happened when he issued his solution? His advice to the prince. The church, they excommunicated him. Said, oh my God, how can a human being engage in politics based on these principles? This is an ungodly way of going about business. Are we going to be guided by those people? Or are we going to be guided by people who submitted to the will of Allah? فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا, when they had submitted, the two of them. So this is a lesson in the story of Ismail. Now how does this figure in the context of Malcolm X? That's what we're here for, not to Ibrahim Ismail. This is contextualization. Malcolm X was known at the end of his life as Al-Hajj Malik al-Shahbaz. He was known as Al-Hajj, the pilgrim. So his story is intricately associated with these days that we are witnessing. Al-Hajj Malik al-Shahbaz. This is what he was known as because of the impact of the Hajj. And his becoming Al-Hajj Malik al-Shahbaz was predicated on his ability to submit himself to the will of Allah, to submit himself and to accept the dictates of Al-Islam. This is what led to that transformation. So we want to look at him, and we want to look at the transformation he undertook, and we want to look at the causes of that and the implications for our situation. Malcolm X, for much of his life, he was a racist. Racists come in all colors. Racism is an equal opportunity employer. It doesn't discriminate. On the basis of racism, we discriminate, but racism itself doesn't discriminate. Racism is an equal opportunity employer. No discrimination. So we have white racists and we have black racists. We have brown, yellow, and red racists. Malcolm X was a racist. And we cannot blame him, because America made him a racist. Not America herself, but a lot of the socio-political realities of America that were found in America during his youth led him to be a racist. What did he experience? And a lot of this is relevant for us today. First of all, he experienced his family's home being burned to the ground by the Ku Klux Klan. He experienced that. So a child living through that horrific reality, what sort of impression do we think that will leave on his consciousness, on his heart, and in his mind? He lived with the reality of his father being murdered. Again, by racist forces. His father was spread out across a train track and then tied down or held down until the train cut his body in half. And then they said it was an accident, that a strong, intelligent, dedicated man, dignified man, with no apparent mitigating or precipitating factors or causes, will commit suicide in that manner. He was murdered. And Malcolm and his family, his mother and brothers and sisters, and the community there in Lansing, Michigan, understood that he was murdered. So having your father murdered, again, by racist forces, what kind of imprint or impression does this leave on your consciousness, on your being towards those forces. And again, this is relevant for us because a lot of our children today, their fathers are being murdered. Some in the streets, not necessarily by racist forces. Some in the streets, drug battles, gang banging, etc. Many children have to grow up with the realities of their fathers being murdered today in America. So Malcolm X experienced that. He experienced his mother, who was an intelligent, dignified, upright, very conscientious individual. And her life is understudied. If you want to read a brilliant study of the role and the impact of Malcolm X's mother, read a book called Ghost in Our Blood, or In My Blood. And by, what's his name? Allah, I've read this book, but a few years back. Teaches, I think, University of Wisconsin. Allah, it'll come to me inshallah. But look up that book, Ghost in Our Blood. And the central story in it, one of the themes, central themes, is examining the impact of Malcolm X's mother on the person who will become Malcolm X. So she was a brilliant lady. She used to be one of the writers for Marcus Garvey's journal. She was a writer for Marcus Garvey's journal. She was a strong, intelligent lady. And she raised her children to be strong and encouraged them to develop their intellects. But Malcolm, he lived as his brothers and sisters. They lived to see their mother, after the death of his father, humiliated and by the degrading reality of a so-called welfare system. With the father gone, she had to go on welfare. And she was humiliated by this experience. And then and how many of our mothers have to go through this experience because of the social realities prevalent in many areas of this country? Humiliation. And some of them are Muslims, unfortunately. Our Muslim sisters experienced the time in New York. And this is a shame on the brothers. We were riding over here, and Malcolm was saying how, this was the pre-Hajj Malcolm, how in Alabama, a group of African-American men were standing around watching an African-American woman be beaten by Bull Connor's police force in Alabama and not doing nothing. He said this is humiliation that these men are putting the women through. And our women in New York were humiliated, Muslim sisters, by welfare, because the fathers were not bearing responsibility for their children and were encouraging the mothers to go and register for welfare instead of getting a job and taking care of those children. So where's the humiliation? The sister, as you know, in America, this is in Sweden. You don't just show up and get some money. You have to have a cause, and one cause or program, AFDC, Aid for Families with Dependent Children. And to be eligible, you have to not know where that father is or who that father is. Otherwise, they'll go after him and take the money because the state is not benevolent. We're not going to give you anything if we know who the father is. We're going to garnish his paycheck. So sisters are filling out forms and applications for welfare, and it comes the child's father unknown. So you know what they started calling our sisters? The holy whores. The holy whores. You coming down here with all this garb and hijab and niqab and long clothes on, but you don't even know who your baby's father is. So our sisters were humiliated and referred to as the holy whores. So this is a degrading and degrading system. And Malcolm saw his mother dragged through the murk and the mire of that humiliation until she lost her mind and had to be confined to an insane asylum. He had to live through being told as a black boy in America that he couldn't aspire to be a lawyer, which was his aspiration. that he couldn't develop his mind. He had to learn a manual trade, because that was his lot in life as a black man. So his dreams and aspirations were crushed. Now a young man developing in this milieu, what do you think? Can you blame him for being a racist? Can you blame him when at every stop in the road, the person putting up the roadblock is a European American? He hated white people. And we can't blame him. And it was a deeply entrenched hatred. So when he heard the teachings of the Nation of Islam, that the white man is the devil, this struck a responding chord within him. And a lot of us are familiar with the rest of the story. So with this sort of background, it's no wonder that he was a racist. We can't blame him. If we're intelligent and compassionate and are able to empathize with the plight of other peoples and other situations than our own, we can't blame him. But he was able to rise above what America made him. And this is a challenge for all of us. We have to all reach down within ourselves and rise above what we've been made and respond to that call of Ibrahim to become something higher and something bigger, so we can lift this country up. So that this noble historical mission, the mission that has been described for this country by the so-called founding fathers. Now we could be tripped up on what they did. Say, well, you're talking about these people like they're something special. They were a bunch of slave owners, and they didn't even recognize the humanity of an African slave. He was chattel. He was 3/5 of a man in reckoning the population. We could get tripped up on that and not look at the vision that informed what they were trying to bring about. Because the vision was bigger than those particulars. So they might have been bumping into a lot of trees. But the forest they described was something, a very noble human project. And if we can all collectively reach down and transcend what the country has made us, then we can use that vision to make this country and make this world a far better place to live. So Malcolm was able to do that. He was able to transcend and go beyond what America had made him. And why was he able to do that? He was able to do that because he was able to respond to the ancient call. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. That there was something human in him. There was that essence in him. ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِهِ. That ruh was not able to be destroyed by the racist reality he found in this country. That ruh remained in him. And it heard the call of Abraham. And Malcolm responded. He responded. He said, read his autobiography. He said in the preparation for creating an organization, he named Muslim Mosque Incorporated. So he said there were many preliminaries I had to do to make this organization work. And then he says, Rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him. He said in his autobiography, page 317, he said, there was one further major preparation that I knew I needed. I had it in my mind for a long time. As a servant of Allah. As a servant of Allah. And brothers and sisters, don't let this world forget that Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, was a dedicated Muslim. He describes himself here as a servant of Allah. And Betty Shabazz herself, his late wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz, in New York City in 1992, before her untimely demise, she told me, she said, at the 96th Street Masjid. She said, we Muslims have a responsibility. She said the nationalists are letting the world know about Malcolm the nationalist. And the leftists and socialists are letting the world know about Malcolm the socialist. She said that the Muslims have a responsibility to let the world know about Malcolm the Muslim. And he says here, he said there was one further major preparation that I knew that I needed. I'd had it in my mind for a long time as a servant of Allah. Ella, I said, Ella, his sister, was a Sunni Muslim. Ella, I said, I want to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. This was the last step that he felt he needed in order to make this organization work. And when he made that pilgrimage, he saw a whole nother world. He saw a whole nother world. He saw a world of brotherhood. And we can argue this was an idealized picture of the Muslim world. That, you know, it's not like that, as some of his critics have said. It's not like that, but in Mecca at Hajj it's like that. And the Hajj is, as human beings, ideals are what raise us to a higher level. We aspire towards an ideal. And by aspiring towards ideals, we are able to create a better reality, which if it doesn't attain to the ideal, at least it approximates the ideal. But when we can no longer aspire, what hope do we have as humanity, as human beings? And this world, they want to strip us of our ideals. They want to make us people who can't aspire to anything higher. This is the whole premise of Francis Fukuyama and the forces behind the end of history. This is it. We can't do better than liberal democracy and free market capitalism. Then we're in bad shape, brothers and sisters. But this is the thesis they're trying to push. This is the end of history. This is it. It doesn't get no better than this. As Muslims, we have to tell the world it can get a lot better than this. It can get a lot better than this. We don't have to accept a world where we're awash in money. Dick Cheney got $20 million as a farewell present from Halliburton to go to assume the vice presidency. What kind of world is this? We're awash in money. But we can't bring it to bear to address the problems confronting this country or this world. We can do a lot better than this. And we have to continue to aspire towards ideals. Hajj is a reality. You can go there and see what Malcolm saw. Even if that reality represents an idealized representation of Islam vis-a-vis the reality in many of our Muslim countries. It is an attainable ideal because it's attained every year in Mecca, where those people from all of those corners where Ibrahim's voice reached respond to the call. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. We're coming, Allah, we're coming. We're responding to the call. Labbaik la sharika laka labbaik. We're coming, you have no partners. And we have to tell this world, Allah has no partners. And many things have been made partners. Money has been made a partner to Allah. So when we talk about idolatry, we're not just talking about statues that the old pagans used to carve of wood and stone and worship. Anything can be made a partner with Allah. The Prophet ﷺ in Sahih al-Bukhari, he says, Taysa abdul dinar wa dirham wa abdul khamisa. That the worshipper of money and clothes is ruined. Clothes have been made partners with Allah. Money has been made partners with Allah, and all the things money can buy have been made partners with Allah. But those who understand and respond to the call, they say, Labbaik la sharika laka labbaik. We are coming, we're responding. You have no partners. We are coming. And they come. Every year they come. the black, the white, the brown, the yellow, the red, everything in between, they come. And Malcolm saw that, and that changed his whole view of race and the race problem. That cured his racism. And he says, when he wrote his famous letter, which everyone should copy and read, the letter he wrote to many different people, and this belies the argument that this was a political stunt. He says, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. And he wrote to his wife, he wrote to his former associates, he wrote to his friends, he wrote to some of his enemies about his experience. And the message was the same. And at the heart of this message, he says, may Allah be pleased with him, and have mercy on him. He says that concerning the attitude of the people he saw, who he described as being the blondest of blondes and having blue eyes and white skin, he says that at that Hajj, he said, we were all truly all the same brothers. All the same brothers. We were all truly all the same brothers. He said, because the belief in God had removed the white from their minds. From these white Muslims he saw. And the white from their behavior. And the white from their attitude. And then he